Okay, everyone, let's get started. Well, thank you for being here and for joining us today. My name is Victoria with Population Connection, and I want to welcome you to our 2021 Year in Review and panel discussion. It has been a very memorable year working with our incredible members and supporters to take these steps towards global population stabilization, and I'm just glad everyone could be here today. So we have three wonderful Population Connection team members with us today. We have Pam Wasserman, the Senior Vice President for Education, Brian Dixon, the Senior Vice President for Media and Government Relations, and Rebecca Harrington, the Senior Director of Advocacy and Outreach. So to get started, we're gonna pop it over to Pam for a presentation.
Thanks so much, Tori. Well, I have some slides I want to share because as I was thinking about the year in review, you forget how much you do in a 12-month span. So I wanted to give you some numbers and some images from the past year in PopEd. So I'm going to share my screen. So first, starting with what we accomplished as far as working with teachers this year. We don't have final numbers, but it's going to be around 625 workshops. And as with last year, as with 2020, most of these were virtual. But of course, last year, we started the year all in person. So the first quarter of the year was all in person, and then we went to all virtual. For this year, we were still mostly virtual until the fall, and then there were a number of in-person events that some of our trainers did around the country. So we're finding that it really varies from geographic area to geographic area of how much is in person in terms of conferences, teacher events in their school districts. We do a lot on university campuses. And unlike last year, most students are fully back on campus. So the other big difference between 2020 virtual and this year is that we were able to get more of our volunteer trainers doing some of these virtual events. They weren't so comfortable with it when the pandemic first started, but we did some training with them. And so I'm happy to report that about a third of our workshops in 2021 were led by volunteers all over the country. So that's great. And that helped us do quite a bit more than we were able to do in 2020. A chunk of these were AP Summer Institutes. And some of you who maybe have had kids who have been through AP courses in high school are familiar with AP courses. The prime ones that population has a home in is AP Environmental Science and AP Human Geography. So every summer, the College Board hosts these training institutes for teachers who are teaching these courses. And now for those two courses especially, they're incorporating our materials. They have us do either presentations, or this year it was a lot of recorded webinars that they showed the new teachers who are teaching these courses. So that was great. When all is said and done, and we won't have final numbers for a few months, but we expect that we will have reached about 12,000 educators this year. And that's a combination of current teachers and future teachers, students who are on university campuses getting their degree and getting certified to teach. On the slide, you'll see that the locations, even though most of these were virtual, the participants were all over the place. So most states in the country, plus DC and Puerto Rico, more than half of the Canadian provinces we were doing sessions in. And we even did some international ones in the Philippines and South Korea this fall. Some of you may know that we also, starting about 5 or 6 years ago, we started offering a graduate level course. This is for current middle and high school teachers, primarily science and social studies teachers, who want to get more in depth than what they would get in just an hour or 2-hour workshop with us. And they can get graduate credit for it. It's a 3-credit course offered through Adams State University in Colorado, but they can take it from anywhere in the world. The professor who teaches it, she is a longtime trainer with us. who is a professor of science education and sustainability at University of Michigan. And we cap it at 30 students so that there can be a lot of interaction. And we offer it both in the summer and the fall. So when teachers take it in the fall, it's 8 weeks. It just ended this fall, just a few days ago. And then the summer one is condensed. It's 4 weeks. It's the same content, but in a more condensed format. So we're going to continue to offer that as long as there seems to be interest, and there does. The other numbers that I pulled for today are just, to give you a sense of all the educators and students from around the world who visit our websites, because only a small fraction are participating in the workshops, but many, many more are looking at the world population video, downloading activities, participating in our student contest. So looking at our 3 sites, the populationeducation.org is the main program site. World Population History is the one where the video lives and where people can do interactive manipulations of the map to see how the dots progress through time. And then the world of 7billion.org is our student contest site. So over 1.5 million unique visitors to those sites so far this year. So the year's not quite over, but that's where we are. We also try to make sure that we always have fresh content on the site. We put up blogs, usually at least once a week, not as much during the summer, but they're on all sorts of topics that are of interest to teachers and how they relate to population issues. And the last few years, we've been picking quarterly themes that we do a lot of blogging around and social media. So you can see on the slide the themes that we had for 2021. So we're just finishing up that pop ed and children's literature theme. And we had a great webinar open to teachers last week, and we're profiling all sorts of great books that tie in with our teaching materials. So. And these are just some scenes from both in person and virtual. That one over toward the left that looks like Texas with blue and red dots, that's from a new activity on gerrymandering, which we came out with last year, right around the time of the census. We came out with a whole new packet of US focused activities. And this is one where students look at different states and how gerrymandering is done to accomplish different aims. So for the virtual presentations, we try to take some of these hands-on activities that you see, the photos of people doing, and try to create some digital tools so that it can still be interactive, even though we're working remotely with teachers all over. And this was just a scene from our last workshop of the year last week. It was a webinar for 108 teachers in the Philippines at the University of Mindanao. And it was in the evening our time, in the morning their time, but there was some great interaction, and we have a professor who I think is going to invite us every semester. So that's really nice. Every other year, we try to amass some statistics to get a read on, what are teachers thinking of our professional development workshops and webinars? How are they using our materials? And we just completed a look at 2019 and 2020. And 2019, of course, was all in person. 2020 was mostly virtual. So in looking at teachers' feedback this year, we were trying to compare what they thought of our workshops, whether it was online or in person, and how it compared to other professional development workshops that they've been involved with. Because teachers have a lot of required professional development. And we were glad to see that the statistics bore out that, whether it was online or in person, they were still, they thought very favorably of their experience with us. This survey of 2 years worth of participants, we got over 1,000 responses to the survey this year. So, we feel like it's, even though it's self-selected because these are people who answer the survey, we did have a pretty nice size sample size to get some feedback from them. There is actually in the new issue of the magazine, which everybody will be getting soon, there are all of these infographics for that came out of that survey. So I'm just sharing a couple of them with you today. One of the things I get asked a lot by members is, what are students getting out of these sessions? Because really we get the feedback from the teachers, but not so much the students directly. But we have started asking teachers, if they can give us some idea of how they think their students' knowledge about population issues, their attitudes toward what they're learning, how that might have changed after going through some of our hands-on activities. So you can see from this one, teachers were saying, that they agree and strongly agree that the materials effectively engage their students, that it increased their students' awareness of the issues. And that last one, increasing critical thinking and problem-solving skills. Obviously, that goes way beyond just population issues, but it's something very important for understanding our concepts, but also just being, really engaged citizens too. Throughout the year, we're always working on curriculum updates, new teaching activities. 2021 was a year of doing quite a bit of enhancements and updates to our middle school curricula and our high school curricula. So, so these numbers I put up are what's been updated and is new for teachers to use. So if they already have the access codes for these curriculum items from even going to a workshop several years ago, every time they log on, it's the most up-to-date versions of all of the materials. And we're going to be finishing up these two items this winter, and then we're going to spend a lot of our time in 2022 with our elementary curricula, our K-5 curricula. I know that many of you are familiar with the fact that we do a student video contest. This is the 11th year that we're doing it, but these are some stats from the one that finished up in May. This was a contest where we asked the students to do a video that's a PSA style. It's 1 minute in length, and we give them 3 different topics. They can choose one of the 3 topics. So for the one that just finished up, the topics were environmental justice, reimagining industrial systems, and looking at some concepts in global health. We got some wonderful videos on maternal health in particular. So if you go to worldofsevenbillion.org, you can look at all of the winning entries from the past year. And I just put on the bottom of this slide some of the press that we got for the students. They have to turn in their submissions in February, but it takes a long time to judge 2,000 to 3,000 entries. So May is when we make the announcements. And you can see they come from all over the world. Last year, the one that just finished up in May, they came from almost every state and territory and 44 countries around the world. So, so that was a successful event and a lot of fun for the staff too. And we launched our new contest in September. We try to give teachers a lot of time to assign it. So we launched it in September. They have until February to get the entries in. And these are the topics for this year. And you can see there's a number of subtopics too, because we want students to kind of narrow their focus, because these are big categories: urbanization, ocean health, agriculture, and food. And they have to link their video within that 1 minute. They have to show how it links to population pressures. And they also have to offer a solution. And some of them are really creative. We had one video in particular I tell you to look at when you look at last year's entry. It was on carbon tagging. Like anytime you would buy something in the store, like if you go to buy a shirt or something, it would tell you, what the carbon emissions were, kind of like when you're looking at nutritional information on a cereal box. So the students they do a lot of research. We give them some scaffolding, some ways to think about their issue, to do storyboarding, teachers can use it as an assignment that takes several weeks. So those are just some things I wanted to share with you, and I'll stop sharing my screen, and at the end I'll be interested in taking any questions you have about anything that we've worked on this past year or anything coming up.
Awesome. Thank you, Pam. And again, a reminder, if you do have any questions for Pam or anyone else for the rest of the presentations, just put it in the chat and we'll get to that at the end. Okay, now we're going to jump over to Brian Dixon for an update in our Government Relations Department.
Thanks, Tori, and thanks everyone for taking some of your time today to join and talk to us. Like Pam, it was interesting to start thinking about this event and looking back over what has happened over the past year, and just realizing like how much really did. It was at the beginning of the year, it started off in Washington with sort of violence and some fear as the Capitol was attacked. But then, once Congress did sort of get settled in after that, after a couple of weeks of sort of not really knowing what was coming next, we saw some really great progress on our priorities. Legislation to permanently repeal the global gag rule was introduced in both the House and Senate. It has a majority of the Senate now as co-sponsors, and has almost 200 members of the House on board. Legislation to permanently fund the United Nations Population Fund was introduced and has 130 plus co-sponsors. And then we started seeing budgets coming out and funding priorities released, and that was all good news as well. Starting first when President Biden released his budget proposal and called for an increase in funding for international family planning to about $640 billion. Not a huge increase, but an increase nonetheless, including of that 56 million would be for the United Nations Population Fund. The Senate has a bill pending that provides $705 billion for international family planning, and the House exceeded both of those, and they're proposing $830 billion. These are really important steps forward, but it's also important to realize that even the highest number remains inadequate to meet the global unmet need for contraceptives that exist. There's at least 218 million people who want to prevent or reduce pregnancy, but have an unmet need for contraceptives. And that's almost certainly gotten worse during the pandemic. Earlier this year, United Nations estimated that there were about probably 20 million people just in the Americas alone who had their access to birth control disrupted by the pandemic. It's going to take about $1.7 billion from the United States to begin to meet this unmet need. So the House level is great. It's about half of what we need. And it's important to realize that even if funding had just simply kept pace with inflation from its previous high point in 2009, and the first Obama funding year, it would be 875.7 billion today. So we have a long way to go, but we're on the right path. As I mentioned earlier, we have legislation to permanently lift the global gag rule. President Biden took action on his own early in his term to do that administratively. And that's great. But as we all know, when something is done by a president, another president can undo it. So that's why we're working so hard to make sure that we pass the Global Health Empowerment and Rights Act, or the Global HER Act, which would prevent a future president from unilaterally reimposing the global gag rule. There's also been really good progress on the domestic front. One of the other steps that President Biden took was to lift the domestic gag rule that the previous administration had imposed on healthcare providers in this country. So that's gone now. The action lifting that wasn't as simple as it was with the global gag rule. It had to go through lengthy process to finally be rescinded fully, but that took effect earlier this month. So that's been gone. And we're looking at, and we've seen proposed increases in funding for the Title X domestic family planning program as well. And importantly, both the House and Senate, as part of their funding bills, also would lift the longstanding Hyde Amendment, which has prohibited the use of Medicaid and Title X and all kinds of federal health insurance programs to provide safe abortions to people across this country. Importantly, the House bill on the international side also lifted its international counterpart, the Helms Amendment. It's been another priority of ours, getting that repealed. The Helms Amendment, as you may know, prohibits the use of foreign assistance funds to provide or promote abortion as a method of family planning, but it has been imposed since its inception as an outright ban under all circumstances. And it's been incredibly harmful and damaging across the world. So we've been working to get that repealed as well. And I'd spend a little bit of time talking about some of the work our Population Connection's 501c4 sister organization, the Population Connection Action Fund, is doing moving forward. And Rebecca will touch on some of this as well. But with the 2022 elections coming up, the political arm is working with candidates across the country running for Congress to educate them about these issues, working with them to get them to take public stands on these issues before they get elected, so that when they do take office, they hit the ground running. And we expect the 2022 elections to be challenging at best. One thing we learned this November is our opponents aren't going away. We saw in Virginia and New Jersey elections that they are motivated. So we need to make sure that our supporters are motivated as well. And to that end, we're working really hard to do that. You can see a list of the candidates we've already endorsed on the Population Connection Action Fund website if you're interested. And we're going to be doing more of those as the year progresses. And as Pam talked about, her gerrymandering activity in population education, we're starting to see what some of that's going to look like for the congressional elections coming up. And it's frankly not that pretty. We're seeing pretty severe gerrymanders in places like Ohio and Texas and North Carolina, where the Republicans are really trying to solidify control and make it very difficult for supporters of reproductive health and family planning and population stabilization to be elected. So we're going to be working really hard on those things going forward, and hopefully all of you will be helping to engage people in your communities as well on these. And finally, I just want to touch a little bit on some of the communications and press outreach we've been doing. One of the things that came out this year was new census data, and there was a lot of press attention to the falling fertility rate in the United States. And most of the coverage was sort of very negative and kind of, the sky is falling. What are we going to do? Our fertility rates are falling. There's going to be no people. And we did a very strong effort to push back on that. Our president appeared on more than 24 radio programs across the country, making the case that falling fertility rates and a slowing population growth rate will bring a lot of benefits to people in this country, and also to the natural world we all have to live in. There's a lot of the audio is available on our website too, if you're interested. I see Marian just shared that link. And we're working to push back on a lot of these claims. We're writing op-eds and pushing out letters, responding to some of these articles you see in the press. I know that Elon Musk has gotten a lot of attention in the last couple of weeks over his claims that we need more people. For some reason, he thinks we need more people to colonize Mars, but you know, it's going to be hard to do that when there's no water. Anyway, so we're making the case that this is a flawed perspective, and we're on the right path here and moving in the right direction. So with that, I will end and kick it back to Tori. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Looks like we have a lot of work to do in 2022. Everyone get excited. So now let's kick it over to Rebecca, who's going to give us an update on our fieldwork.
Thanks, Tori. I just need a second to adjust my old computer. Hi, everyone. It's really nice for all of you to, as Brian and Pam mentioned, talk about all of the things we've done this year in a year that has simultaneously seemed to drag on forever, but also flown by. So it's nice to be here and to chat about all we've done in 2021. So I would say that while 2020 was our year of adjusting to virtual organizing and sort of getting settled with the idea of working in a pandemic, 2021 was our year of organizing creatively. So going into year 2 of the pandemic, we really wanted to make sure that our activists stayed engaged and motivated after both a year of virtual organizing and also a big election year in 2020 when there was a lot of energy and adrenaline and momentum. And I'll also just note that I'm going to be giving some political updates and updating you on the work that we're doing through our action fund. So just a note about that at the top. So we spent December of 2020 and the first week of 2021 doing get out the vote work for the Senate elections in Georgia. We really wanted to finish the fight that we'd been engaged with throughout 2020, using the momentum of the general election to work with 100 volunteers who collectively called nearly 10,000 voters in Georgia and had conversations with 1,000 of those folks. So that felt like a really good thing to be part of, and it felt good to continue that work so that we could secure our narrow but nonetheless majority in the Senate. And then since we had already been working virtually in 2020, we went to remote work, and then immediately in a couple of weeks just had to switch our annual Capitol Hill Days event to virtual kind of on a dime. But since we were already doing everything virtually in 2021, we were able to plan our Capitol Hill Days event as a fully virtual event, which allowed us to plan some really engaging sessions and take advantage of the accessibility of Zoom lobby visits, and simultaneously to host a really successful Twitter event that allowed us to reach really far beyond just the folks who joined us for the event. And we tried out a new model for organizing this year's Capitol Hill Days, which worked really well. We worked closely, our field team worked closely with a team of volunteer Capitol Hill Days lead volunteers who dedicated a lot of their time and effort to recruiting activists to attend the event, to organize virtual lobby visits, to moderating info sessions, and to engaging with our other participants throughout the weekend. And the leads were really instrumental in putting the event together. And that model of having these lead volunteers really allowed us also to build close working relationships with each of these volunteers who all have been involved with the Fight for Her campaign and working with our team in some capacity for a long time. So during the Capitol Hill Days event, we had 200 activists from around the country join us for 4 informational sessions where we heard from frontline providers of family planning and reproductive health. We learned from experts working on conservation and climate resiliency efforts. We talked with advocates for LGBTQ plus communities around the world. And we heard from reproductive health and rights policy experts as well. We were very fortunate to have Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky from Illinois join us for a great keynote talk, which really rallied all of our activists and our staff, I would say too. And I think all of our speakers did a really good job cutting through the barrier of the screen and of Zoom to really motivate and engage our activists. So following this, we kind of spread this out over a number of days. This number of days of learning, we had 86 people go to meetings at 91 Capitol Hill offices. And the focus of Capitol Hill Days, and I should say all of 21, is just all the Global Her Act all the time. All of our advocacy efforts have been focused on getting the Global Her Act passed, which we're still working very hard on and will until we get there. So that was our primary ask that we were having our activists make in their lobby visits with their senators and representatives to support the Global Her Act, to permanently end the global gag rule. And then additionally, we had some funding asks. We were asking them to lobby for, to advocate for, as Brian mentioned, $1.7 billion for international family planning, including $111 million for UNFPA. And, you know, as with all lobby days, the activists mostly meet with the staffs of members of Congress, but we had a couple of groups. Our Maryland group got to meet with Representative Jamie Raskin, and our California constituents were able to meet with Representative Salud Carbajal and Representative Julia Brownlee, who are all really strong supporters of international family planning and reproductive rights. And then as a result of our activist advocacy, as well as our, I think our staff time and effort, Senator John Hickenlooper of Colorado signed on as a co-sponsor of the Global Her Act this spring, which was, you know, in the Senate we need every Democratic vote that we can get. So also, while we were hosting these virtual visits, we hosted a Twitter rally that was focused on ending the global gag rule. And this reached over 5 million people, generated 1,200 likes, which included tweets and mentions and shares using the Fight for Her hashtag, which is the hashtag we primarily use in our online advocacy efforts with our Fight for Her campaign. So then moving into the summer, we hosted our 4th annual and 2nd year of all virtual Summer of Her organizing training program, which included 8 weeks of weekly training on a different organizing topic, relational organizing, event planning, using social media for advocacy. We had weekly work blocks for fellows. The participants in this program we refer to as fellows. So they used that time to practice skills. And then we also had every other week leadership training sessions to develop skills as leaders within the reproductive health and rights movement. The purpose of this program is to really go in deep with the folks who join on the issues we work on and teach them, you know, kind of like raw grassroots organizing skills. And we also are trying to develop leaders who can take these skills and bring them back to their communities. So throughout the summer, we worked with 25 fellows from across the country to develop these advocacy and organizing skills, knowledge about international family planning, and to work on how they can bring this fight to their communities. We again used that model of the lead fellows who took on the role of mentorship of the rest of the fellows and helped us recruit for events. And they took the lead on taking our summer action. Sorry, I have a sad little boy who's home who's wanting to join, so apologies for the background noise. And they helped us recruit for events and took the lead on taking our summer actions, such as the Summer of Her Summit and the Global Gag Rule Week of Action. And I wanted to highlight a couple of people who joined us as fellows who particularly stood out to us. We worked with Harish, who's based in Cleveland, Ohio, is currently taking a gap year before medical school and is really interested in learning how to better incorporate reproductive health and rights into his future practice. He had a really compelling personal story for caring about these issues. And is currently working with AmeriCorps doing some service provision before he figures out what path he wants to take in terms of, whether it's advocacy or service provision. And then he told us, quote, that the summer of her was one of the most eye-opening and amazing experiences I have ever gotten to be a part of. During my time, I was able to learn a lot about matters such as the repercussions of the global gag rule and the Global Her Act, while simultaneously honing my grassroots organizing skills. In addition, I was able to connect with and become part of a community of like-minded individuals who I know I can reach out to for future activist work. We also worked with another longtime volunteer, Ajua, who had been living in Missouri over the summer, moved to Ohio to start med school, and kind of dove right in with her new community, inviting our team to give a presentation on the Fight for Her campaign, and already having conversations and connecting with folks there. Our last volunteer I wanted to highlight is Collette. Wanted to highlight them because they worked with us really closely in 2020 when they were still in high school. Were really engaged with our Get Out the Vote efforts. Did a lot of calling and phone banking, and then this year really showed their leadership skills as both a Capitol Hill Days and a Summer of Her lead activist and fellow. So throughout the summer, the sort of practical, concrete things we had fellows do were we participated in a week of action to end the global gag rule, which we worked in coalition alongside many other groups in the international family planning space. And our fellows called and emailed and tweeted at their senators and representatives, really urging them and pushing them to end the global gag rule and to support the Global Her Act. And we also hosted, again, a fully virtual, but our 4th annual Summer of Her Summit, which featured a couple of our great colleagues, Dr. Gladys Kalima Zikuzoka, who's the founder and CEO of Conservation Through Public Health in Uganda, and Dr. Michelle Dubon, who is the medical director of WINGS Guatemala, which is an organization that provides reproductive health care in Guatemala. And we've worked with both of those organizations closely for years. Just kind of touching back on how we had to think a little bit outside of the box for keeping people involved this year. As part of our leadership efforts, we hosted a Repros networking event with several of our colleagues. We organized it as like a Zoom speed dating event so that our fellows got some really good FaceTime and one-on-one time or small group time with professionals in this field so they can see all of the different opportunities and what that looks like. We also, kind of keeping on the path of doing different things and mixing it up. We did a couple of really compelling Instagram live conversations. One with Dr. Jalicia Jolly, who's a professor and writer and researcher. We talked to her during Black Maternal Health Week, focusing on the importance of, talking of, why we have such a week and why we need to talk about these issues all the time and more than we are, and what can be done to improve maternal health in the US and the Caribbean. And then we did another Instagram Live for Pride Month with a colleague in Kenya and a colleague here in DC to talk about the barriers facing the LGBTQ plus community in accessing reproductive health care here in the US and in Kenya. And that's a thing we're going to continue doing, because it just really engages folks who are on social media, and it just allows you to reach people all over the world. So then throughout the fall, again, just keeping that focus on, passing the Global Her Act, passing the Global Her Act, passing Global Her Act. We've continued to engage our activists through a month of weekly actions in October. We had them sharing petitions and sharing social media actions and calling and emailing their representatives. We recently did a national volunteer call with our colleague, Dr. Joan Castro of the PATH Foundation in the Philippines, who talked about the population, health, and environment work she does with communities in that country. to bring family planning and to work to mitigate the impact of climate change. Now we're, as we're getting to the end of the year, we're looking forward to 2022. We're having one-on-one conversations with volunteers to check in with them and see how they're feeling, and letting them know, that we'll have a lot of work to do in 2022. We'll be spending the first part of the year until it's done, continuing to ask people to call and email and push their legislators to support the Global Her Act and get it included in the Senate Appropriations Bill, and really keep people energized throughout the year as we lead up to the midterm elections in the fall. So we'll be, as always, doing our Capitol Hill Days event in the spring. We'll have some sort of summer leadership and training program, and our goal is to have as many people on the ground or at their computers making calls and sending texts to do whatever we can to have the midterm elections go our way. I think that's what I've got for our 2021 year. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have, and thank you for having me.
Thanks, Rebecca. That was great. And thank you to all our panelists for being here for today and providing those amazing updates. So we're going to move into the Q&A now, and many of you submitted questions beforehand, but please feel free to use the chat to ask any other questions or follow-up you might have. We can ask for the panelists, or our staff members are responding in the chat as well. And unfortunately, we probably won't get to all of the questions today. So if we don't answer one of the questions you have, please feel free to email us at engage@popconnect.org, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Okay, so let's take it away. This first question is for Pam, and we had someone who had a question about your presentation, and they wanted to know which are the 5 states that weren't included in the 45 that you guys work in.
Oh gosh, I know that I don't think we did anything in Alaska or Montana. I think Maine, I don't think we were doing anything in Maine this year. We were doing some things in the Dakotas, but they tend to be the more sparsely populated states. But I will say this, now that we are doing more remote, there are places that staff wouldn't travel to just because it was expensive to go to Alaska or Hawaii, or if we didn't have a trainer on the ground there. But now that we've gotten pretty good at doing the virtual sessions, I think we can expand into places that we haven't been. So my goal is to get it all the way up to 50, and I think we can do it. In fact, we just hired, it's a new position starting in January for online learning coordinator for our team, somebody who's gonna help us even post-pandemic, looking forward into how to have a really good virtual presence nationwide on a permanent basis, because I think the last year and a half has taught us that we can do this, and we can do a lot more than we've already been doing too.
That's great. Okay, and then a follow-up for you, Pam, specifically. Can some of the teaching webinars be accessed on your website to listen in on, or just to see what they're like?
Yeah, we record a number of them, so the recorded ones are definitely accessible. And if you want to attend a live one, you could just kind of let us know if there's a particular, part of the country you're in, and, we can ask whoever's sponsoring our event, would you mind, somebody who's not in your class or your event participating. And yeah, so just can reach out to me and I'll let you know.
Great, thank you so much for that. Okay, so more general questions for all of our panelists. The first one we have, how will international family planning efforts be improved in the next few years?
I'll go with that first. And I think a lot of that answer remains to be seen, although I think there's a lot to be hopeful about. Hopefully with more money and with the elimination, hopefully forever, of policies like the global gag rule, more clinics will be open, more clinics will be able to provide the full range of care that their patients need. They'll be more comprehensive, they'll be more accessible, and we'll begin to reduce the unmet need. I think, yeah, I think it really is just a question of political will and political and getting those funds out there and getting the right policies in place to allow the people to do their jobs.
Great. Okay, next question. Kind of following the first one, what emphasis is being placed on changing attitudes in the United States to be more favorable towards family planning and lower fertility rates?
Well, I think I touched on this a little when we talked about our press and communications efforts. I think the attitude of Americans on family planning is pretty clear. It's very supportive. I said once, I think the only people in America who are opposed to family planning and reproductive health care somehow get themselves elected to Congress as Republicans. But it's overwhelming support for these things. It's not reflected in the policies and the government, but with the people. I don't think there's a strong need to try to change people's attitudes about this, which is good. I think there does need to be some work to sort of deal with this question of population growth, which seems to be taken as a necessary factor for all kinds of things, and we are working pretty tirelessly to counter that wherever it arises. And that is going to take some attitude changing, especially among reporters. And so we have been trying to reach out to reporters who cover this stuff and talk to them about these things. And you're starting to see some of this pay off. I don't know. There was a story in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago about young people not having kids, and we worked with the reporter who wrote that for a while. And we are trying to do a lot more of that kind of outreach, individually, one-on-one with the people who cover this stuff. And as I said, we did this, for lack of a better term, a radio tour, talking about the census data and what it means for local communities, and really making the case that, it doesn't have to be constant growth for people to have a good quality of life. In fact, the constant growth probably undermines it. That, in fact, smaller families are good for those families. It allows a whole bunch of opportunities that may not be there for larger families. So we're out there trying to make that case.
Great, thank you. And following up a little bit on that, someone asked that they're wary of changes instituted by presidential order because they can be repealed by the next president. Do you have any comments on that or concerns about some of these actions moving forward?
I agree. And while it was necessary that President Biden act to lift the global gag rule, it's not enough, because as you said, a future president could, if that's all that happens, reinstate it. That's why we're working so hard to pass the Global HER Act to prevent that from happening. Because the global gag rule really is, it undermines family planning everywhere. It hurts the organizations that reject it. It hurts the organizations that accept it. It denies people, regardless of where they live, of access to the care they need. So it's really crucial that be dealt with in this year, and we're really hopeful that when the final spending packages get dealt with sometime in the new year, that the global HER is included in it.
Great, thank you.
Tori, could I add something just to the previous question? Just a quick add on to what Brian said. I think just kind of touching on what Brian said about how in this country there's overwhelming support for family planning. I think that's for sure true. But I think the small minority of those opposed to family planning and reproductive health and rights is so vocal and so loud. So part of our job and role always, but it will be especially crucial in the coming year, is to, we have facts, which apparently don't matter anymore, but we're right. We have kind of the moral right. So a big part of our job will be, screaming as loud as the anti-choice side and making sure that we have a really strong message that we're constantly hammering home, and making sure that people who want to get involved, but who might be nervous to do so because they think, that the country is being overtaken by far-right extremists, letting them know that we actually have the majority of people in this country on our side. So I just wanted to note that for folks who are wondering how to get involved and what can I do, and feeling overwhelmed at sort of the situation that's happening right now.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yes. Okay, so let's have one more for Pam. This person said, I heard that Spain's population will be half of what it is today in 75 years due to their low fertility rate. Is this true?
Yeah, so that question was submitted ahead of time. So I did look it up. So not quite by half, about 30% by the end of the century. It looks like it's close to 50 million people in Spain today. It'll be about that in 30 years, and then it's going to start to decline. That's according to the United Nations. And they come out with new projections every 2 years. They were supposed to come out with one this past year, and it's been delayed until next year. So maybe Marian could put in the chat the World Population Prospects link. That's what we look up for the projections out to 2100. PRB.org, Population Reference Bureau, they have projections out to 2050. So that's another resource we use quite a bit. But it looks like Spain's fertility rate's about 1.4. I think a lot of their population change it'll depend on migration too. I mean, if more migrants are taken into Spain, then that might counter the lower fertility rates.
Great, thank you, Pam. Okay, so Brian, you touched on this briefly during your presentation, but as we all know, recently Elon Musk claimed that we must increase the human population for our planet to prosper and grow. Why is it such a common misconception prosperity requires the human population to continue to rise, and what are we doing to respond?
I can't answer the question as to why that attitude has taken hold, but I think I've touched on a lot of what we're doing to respond to it by making the case. And frankly, people all over the world have made these decisions for themselves, right? They've made their own choices about what kind of families they want, and they've overwhelmingly, when given choices, make the choice that smaller families work better for them. For a lot of reasons. And so I think, I think that the fact that lots of pundits think this is a bad thing and get annoyed by it doesn't change the fact that people in general are making the best decisions they can for themselves, and they're going to continue to do so. I mean, we'd love to see more discussion of the benefits of those choices people are making instead of everybody bemoaning it. But we're going to keep trying to make sure that those stories get told. So yeah, I think that's it.
Great, thank you. And we do have just one more question, so if folks have anything else, please feel free to get in touch with us. Okay, so this one is for everyone. I'd kind of like to know everyone's thoughts on this because it is kind of just a guessing game at this point, but what's your best guess about how the Supreme Court will rule on the inevitable attempts to weaken Roe v. Wade? Obviously, we've had a lot of discussion about the Supreme Court in the past couple months, and everyone wanted to hear your thoughts on what we will find out in June with the rulings and how this is going to impact the future of reproductive rights.
Rebecca, do you want to go?
Sure. Try not to be super doom and gloom about this. To be perfectly honest, I don't feel great about the decision I think that they'll hand down. I think the makeup of the court it suggests that they will make a decision that will gut Roe v. Wade, which will immediately trigger pretty serious rollback of reproductive rights and the ability to access abortion in, I think, upwards of 26 states. I think there were things that were said during the oral arguments last week that led particularly comments by Amy Coney Barrett that led some people to believe that she might rule more favorably in favor of our side, but I don't tend to agree with that. I think there's no judicial paper trail to suggest that she's interested in doing anything other than gutting Roe v. Wade. So I think at the same time, though, I think that doesn't mean that we should give up and throw our hands up. I think we need to still be going to rallies in the streets when safe and making calls and having talks like this and talking about and letting people know what will happen, if and when Roe v. Wade is gutted. But unfortunately, I don't think it's going to go well for us come June.
Great. Brian, Pam, any thoughts?
I think Rebecca summed it up pretty well. I think what's happening with their refusal to block the implementation of the Texas law is a pretty clear indication of where they're going with this. And I'm puzzled by some of the press I've seen around this, where things are like, the Supreme Court may uphold the Mississippi law, but they won't overturn Roe v. Wade. But that's like, you can't, those two things can't both be true. I mean, in order to uphold the Mississippi law, you have to overturn Roe v. Wade. It's not simple. So I don't know what, I think, if there's any small hope here, and I don't think there's much hope at all, it's that John Roberts can move a vote or two by making the case that this is really threatening the legitimacy of the court itself, and that decisions like this undermine the court's role in the country. So I'm not sure that he's going to be successful in making that argument, but that's if you need a sliver of hope to hold on to, that might be it, but I wouldn't hold on to it too tightly.
Perfect, thank you. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you everyone for joining us, for your wonderful questions, and really for all of your support and dedication. And if anyone has anything else they'd like to chat about, always feel free to reach out to us. Again, we will put the contact information in the chat, and I'm always happy to hear from you. So thank you again for joining us. This was a great discussion, and thank you to our panelists. This was wonderful.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.